And of course, in Georgetown, Guyana, this is Charles Sugram. We're starting a new program today on Kaitio Radio 99.1, 99.5 FM. It's also streaming on YouTube and on Facebook. We want to welcome you to our inaugural program. We'll be having these programs every 2 weeks, right here, the same time. And we'll have many, many guests, professional Guyanese discussing the oil talk with OGGN Guyana. That is our program tonight. Today, we will discuss an oil contract for Guyana just requiring counting of oil barrels extracted. Before I begin our program, introduce our honored guests, I just want to give you a little history of OGGN. A few years ago, after the Petroleum Sharing Agreement, that is the PSA, signed by the coalition was made public, a group of patriotic Guyanese met in New York to begin to analyze the oil contract. Getting the team together was a gentleman out of Canada, Darsh Kushial, an engineer, and he was so involved and so passionate about Guyana that he just put us together to form a group. We met frequently at Mike Passard home here in New York. It was agreed that we register a not-for-profit organization. This was duly done, and we registered OGGN, which is Oil and Gas Governance Network. We have been on Liberty Avenue quite often on Leffers and by Sybil Bakery, sharing out flyers and informing fellow Guyanese of the contract. We do that mostly in the summer months because, of course, more people will stop and speak with you during that time. We also had outreach at the Mandir in Liberty Avenue for a few years, and we had excellent presentation from Guyanese professionals on all aspects of the oil and gas sector. Funding for OGGN has largely been contribution from many Guyanese. In 2022, we took it up a notch higher by making application to the IRS for a 501c3. That was duly approved last year, so we are now officially a 501c3 organization. Now, any contribution to OGGN from persons, business, or whatever it is, they are tax deductible if you live in the United States. So please, if you think that it's good for us, for our country, do make a contribution to OGGN. Tonight, as I said, our topic is an oil contract for Guyana, just requiring counting of oil barrels extracted. And to help us along that journey tonight in our inaugural program is two professional Guyanese, great sons of Guyana. One is Dr. Andre Brandley. He resides in Switzerland, and he's actually in Switzerland today. And the other, of course, is Dr. Cyril Hunt, former ambassador. Gentlemen, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Okay, Dr. Brandley, do you want to give us an idea of what is the purpose of OGGN? What are really OGGN formed to do?
Okay, well, thanks for the opportunity to be on this program. It's a really exciting moment that OGGN has a slot now on Kaitio Radio, and of course on the social media channels that are associated with this. Now, OGGN, as you said, was started in 2017 with the explicit mission to help and educate Guyanese with all issues related to the oil and gas industry that has been growing and started with first oil in 2019. Now, we were mainly driven by the fact that we want to prevent that Guyana faces the oil curse, which means that having this massive influx of oil money can have very bad effects on the society, on the economy of the country. You get distortions, etc. On top of it, we were also interested in having independent oversight of the oil contracts. As the Guyanese public knows, the oil contract that was signed with Exxon is say the least, not optimal for the country, in our opinion. And our mission has been to advocate, in general, rule of law, transparency, good governance, accountability, with respect to all oil and gas-based activities in country. It also includes that we want to have strong environmental oversight with regard to the oil and gas exploration activities in the country. And I would like to make it very clear, we are not here to shut down the oil and gas exploration in the country. We want to keep it up to the highest level of standards that are standard actually in Europe, as well as in the US and in Canada, where we have big expat or diaspora Guyanese. So maybe to put it in a nutshell, our mission is to inform and educate the Guyanese public on issues regarding oil and gas. We would like to engage local and international media to inform them about what is going on in these areas in Guyana. And we would like to advocate, as mentioned already, transparency, accountability, and good governance by engaging in a dialogue with the government of Guyana, with CARICOM member states, and with international organizations that could help and advise us and Guyana and the people of Guyana that we can optimally exploit and profit from the oil and gas resources that have been found off the coast of Guyana. I would also like, in sort of closing on this aspect, to make a few points very clear. There have been allegations in the Guyanese press that we are anti-government, that we are paid by shadowy sources, and so on. We are very transparent about our financing, as was pointed out by Charles Sugrim, the host. We are supported by small donations from Guyanese abroad. We have never favored or endorsed any party in Guyana, and we are strictly staying neutral with regard to any party preferences. Of course, individually, we have people that have leaned to one or to the other side, but OGGN has never made a statement in that respect. And of course, the incumbent government will get, we will address issues that we think need to be addressed. But this doesn't mean that we are anti-government. We only just want to get the oil contracts, environmental issues addressed according to the laws of Guyana. And if we feel that this is not done, we speak out. So in a nutshell, that's essentially what's the mission of OGGN. We are a group of professionals with different backgrounds. We have academics, we have professional people, we have people with backgrounds in tax law, etc. Plus, we also have a growing network of specialists in the oil industry that we can tap in to get their opinion. And we see our role really to educate and inform the Guyanese public. We do this by writing letters in the Guyanese media. You've seen letters by myself, for example, but by other prominent members of OGGN. And today's topic will be one of the letters that was spearheaded by Kendrick Hunt, and we're going to talk more about that. So in closing, back to you, Charles.
Thank you, Dr. Brandley. Well said. And Dr. Hunt, as Dr. Bradley just said, we are at information dissemination. We are neither anti-government nor anti-opposition. We do not support any political movement. We don't support any political party. We are free of politics. And we want to make that very clear to the Guyanese people that whatever we say on our program and in our writings, it's all what in our professional judgment is good for our country. So when we speak something that the government do not conform to, it's not that we are anti-government. It is our perspective, it's our view, and we hope that the government will at least listen to other views. Dr. Hunt, what do you say of that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me this evening to this very important discussion about the use of oil in Guyana, one of our natural resources, and in this case, a non-renewable natural resource, which means we have to be very careful about how we proceed. My view is that professional help given by Guyanese in Guyana and overseas is important for us looking at what we could benefit from what belongs to the Guyanese people. So for us, it must be one of professionalism, providing solid advice based on facts and evidence from a theoretical as well as from a practical standpoint. I think that the work by this particular organization is important because we want to think that the contract that we now have has some limitations. And I know we get into a lot more details on that a little bit later on. Our last letter highlighted some of the things we think might be useful for the Guyanese people and the government of Guyana to consider. And I know we'll touch on some of those in a short while. We know also that the company EEPGL, which is a combination of three different companies, they have their objectives of what they're about. And their objectives are certainly different than what the people of Guyana should be looking after. I will stop here because I'd like to share this conversation with everyone. Thank you, Charles and Andre.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hunt. And I want to get directly into our discussion tonight. Our topic again is an oil contract for Guyana, just requiring counting of oil barrels extracted. And there was a letter written by OGGN, of which both of you gentlemen, and I myself, signatory to that letter, and it spells out what OGGN is recommending to the government. So we have told the public is we have had oil now, we have discovered oil 8 years ago. We have actually got some revenue about 3 years now when production started. Guyana is getting 14.5% of total revenue. The oil companies are getting 85.5%. Now, our model that you guys propose, and which I want to discuss now with you, is in line with what the IMF and Global Witness has reported in their report. So, Dr. Hunt, you want to start the discussion on that? What is the proposal?
Yes, the proposal is based on the fact that Guyana is starting from what we're going to call a disadvantage, in that we don't have expertise in Guyana to do the type of real-time accounting that is required. If you look at how the benefits for Guyana is to be collected, one, it's royalties, and two, it's profits after a certain amount of money has been deducted from the revenue. And in this case, it is 75% off the top of the total revenue received. And now for us to be able to verify what that 75% in terms of cost is made up of, we have to have a series of accounting and auditing experts. And right now, Guyana does not have those individuals available. Only recently, the person in charge of the Guyana Revenue Authority says that they don't have the staff to do it. And if you would have had a chance to read Dr. Alan Gulsaran's report this past week in Kaito in Stabroek News, you'll see he has pointed out some limitations of what is required in the audits that were submitted. So trying to resolve how you could verify what you're getting in terms of statements from the company, EEPGL, is a task that we have not been able to do very well. Oil production and extraction, and I use the word extraction here, is not production. I'll tell you about that later on. It's an extraction operation because what you're doing is not producing anything. You're just extracting something that has already been created by nature. So we don't have the expertise on the ground. We need a very simple way to measure what is coming out. And what we are proposing in our proposal is that we want to count barrels. We don't want to do an accounting work that requires expertise in those areas. And to be able to do accounting in a field that we are not qualified in over the years that we've been involved, we don't have the expertise either at the technical level nor at the accounting level. So what we devised in our particular model is what we call a gross sharing model. It says, let us count barrels. That's the only objective measure that we can work with, and there would be no difficulty with transparency. We need people to stand on the FPSOs and count the barrels, and then we will have a more complete way of understanding what is coming out of the ground. Now, the current contract says Guyana should get 14.5%. Let us put that in barrel terms. It really means 14.5 barrels we will get out of every 100 barrels. And that is going to remain for the life of this project. There is nothing in the contract to say that that particular relationship will change. We feel that that particular arrangement will not net Guyana the kind of benefits that we think we should have, because there are other limitations in that PSA that is now existing. So when we look at where we're supposed to be going, we want a simple, transparent methodology for counting barrels. If we can count the barrels, we don't have to worry with all the sophisticated technological measurements. We don't have to worry about all the fancy accounting arrangements that go into that preparing of the income expenditure statements and balance sheets. So for now, those are some of the initial things I'd like to state, and I'll stop here for now to get an input from you.
Thank you, Dr. Hunt. Dr. Bradley, as I want to pick up on what we just heard, one is that we will be getting 14.5%, and some Guyanese believe that, based on the writing in the newspaper, that this 14.5 will somehow increase to a higher percentage when the cost for drilling has been recovered. Now, we know that there is no ring fencing, and the likelihood of Exxon stop taking 75% from the revenue for cost recovery seems to be in the distant future. What are your views on that?
I think, we have to define two things. One is the term FPSO, of course, that Kendrick just used. These are production boats offshore that are involved in the extraction process. They basically process the raw oil that is coming up from the ground, separates the gas and the water, and stores it there, that they can be then pumped onto ships that will take it then to the oil markets where the oil will be sold. That's just to define that term in case the audience is not aware what FPSO means. So we're talking about offshore production boats, and all Guyana's oil reserves are offshore. So you need these boats, and they are not in shallow water. So you cannot have you need a floating situation, because we're talking about oil reserves that are 1 kilometer below the sea level. That's one thing. The other point is the issue of ring fencing, which is also, again, a technical term that probably most of the audience might not know exactly what you mean. It's ring fencing means that each floating boat has to be self-financing. So you can control that by having small oil blocks that you have given to that you have licensed to all companies. Now, the Stabroek block is huge. It's 2/3 of the surface of Switzerland, just to keep that in mind. So it's a huge, in a way, the production sharing agreement with Exxon and its partners is written. It allows for Exxon to rapidly move ahead to develop additional oil fields that they have discovered. On the other hand, as Charles mentioned, it's almost impossible to get to a point where costs are actually recovered, and the amount of profit oil that Guyana will be sharing with Exxon will be beyond those 25% that will be split up between Exxon and its partners and Guyana. So we are in a situation where, for the foreseeable future, we're going to be left with those 14.5% that you have mentioned. Now, I see a bunch of issues here, and I think the proposed model is very interesting because we have to keep in mind that the issue of being able to do auditing is evident already now. We have two audits that cover the period of 1999 to 2017, so the pre-oil production period. It covers 18 years. That audit covers 1.7 billion US dollars, not completed yet. And we have another open audit for the period of 2018 to 2020, which covers costs of 7.3 billion US dollars. Again, that audit has not been completed. So it's very clear that Guyana is not able to do these audits in a timely manner. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. As you might know, we're going to have a situation, the government will be auctioning off three deep water oil blocks in the coming weeks. So actually, the auction I think is going to be ending in 2 weeks. So we have 3 blocks in deep sea and 11 in shallow waters. If there is oil found there, we'll have the same issue. And the revised production sharing agreements are essentially very similar to the production sharing agreement that Exxon has signed with the coalition government at the time. So the auditing problem won't get less. The auditing problem is going to get much worse. And we're talking about a country of 800,000 people. So I think we are really in a situation where we have to think radically different. How do we want to regulate how we are sharing the oil with the oil companies? And the growth split model has the advantage that you basically decide, okay, you get a particular share. What we are proposing is 55 barrels go to Guyana and 45 barrels go to the oil company. And then it's left up to the oil company how fast it can recover its expenses out of that. Guyana has these 55 barrels that it will get, and it will get right from the beginning. It will get a substantial share of its, of its natural resources that it could sell, of course, and that they can use those revenues for development, infrastructure, for education, etc. So we basically can get rid of all the auditing issues. Yeah, if you can see also with 7.3 billion, doing a deep and thorough audit is impossible. You can just do spot checks, and we're going to have more and more auditing coming up for us to do. So I think we should seriously consider this model, which is very simple and which is not something, it's not a pie in the sky. Indonesia is a country that uses exactly this model. So it's not that we're not reinventing the wheel. It is a revenue sharing model that is applied and that is in action in a country like Indonesia. And I think, one of the first things is that maybe the present government might want to talk to people in Indonesia and see what's their experience. So we should really consider this and see, wouldn't this make life for Guyanese and for the Guyanese government easier if we could get rid of most of the auditing? Back to you, Charles.
Thank you, Dr. Brandley. And again, you're listening to Kite Radio 99.1, 99.5 FM. Gentlemen, I think for the viewers tonight, I'm not sure if they quite understand, and maybe they do. But currently, we all agree we're getting 14.5, as Dr. Hunt said, 14.5 barrel for every 100 barrels. However, the contract says when the cost for exploration has been repaid, then Guyana will get a bigger share of the profit because the profit will be larger now, not the 75% anymore. The cost will not be 75%, the cost will be operating costs. But gentlemen, I did analysis last year with 2022, the oil company's 75% cost recovery, they got $7 billion US. How much of that went for exploration costs? How much of that went for operating costs? We don't know that. And both you gentlemen are absolutely correct. We don't have accountants who are qualified in oil and gas. We don't have the professionals who can go and audit Exxon books. So we are kind of wasting our time, and it's costing us money as well. So this proposal that OGGN came up with, just for our audience to understand, Global Witness also had a similar model. They were saying 10% royalty, 25% taxes, and 50-50 share, which comes up to about the same 55 barrels. IHS Markle, their model was 10% royalty, 10% tax, and 50-50 share of profit. So it's almost similar to that. Both of these entities came up with a ballpark about 55 barrels that you're proposing now. So to our audience out there, instead of going to all this detail to go into audit and to verify the cost incurred by the oil companies, we're saying leave that alone. Don't even try to do that. Let us do a simple model. And gentlemen, sometimes it's so simple, it's difficult to understand. So you're saying very simple, let us change that model that we have now, put aside all the others, 55 barrels of every 100 produced goes to Guyana, 45 barrels stays with the oil company. Now, Dr. Hunt, you said that we'll be on the SPO to count barrels, but I think those days are gone now. So we'll have meters, we'll have calibration, so we ensure our engineers who are there, they can ensure they can monitor the production to give us an accurate count of how many barrels was produced.
Yes, good observation. I use that to give you the sense that it can be done either way. In fact, what you can have is both. Once a couple of people lodging on the FPSOs themselves, and you can have something done electronically to transfer the information. The key difference here is that your accounting for barrels must be separate from what the company is using. We cannot, what you call, piggyback on what they're using, because you're getting back into the same old position of not being able to verify independently. So we want independent verification. It can be done at two levels, one person or a team on the boat itself, and we have the electronic access stationed in Guyana, and there's a 24-hour operation every single day to manage and to measure what is coming out. So that's the approach we are suggesting.
And we're talking about a limited number of boats. The planning of the government is talking about by 2030 around 10 production boats offshore. So this is this is overseeable. The auctions of the new oil fields, there we probably see first oil, if at all, earliest in 10 years. So we'll have enough time then to work out and figure out how we do this properly until other oil fields come other oil blocks become ready for first oil and for oil production or oil extraction, as Kendrick would say.
Yeah, and also let me just add this. Some of the monies we are getting now, we can hire and get the technology to have that linkage going immediately. That should be part of your first kind of expenses coming out of the oil industry, because we want full information. We don't want to have secondary information coming to us, and we don't want to depend on audited financial statements, which are many times years behind the reality that we have. And let me just make this point. When you have a non-renewable resource like oil, once the extraction process starts, there's nothing there in the ground after so many years. And once you start increasing your extraction rates, the projected time frame that you initially given could suddenly cut in half by putting in all the new extraction operations. And those are some of the concerns you must bear in mind with looking at getting a right value and share today. You cannot wait for it down the road. What they are doing is using existing revenues to pump into new what we call reservoirs. So that particular capital share index that is coming out of current revenues, that will continue for a long time. For as long as they have unexplored lands, those extra revenues will go towards opening new reservoirs. And we will be stuck at that 14.5 barrels out of every 100.
And that is exactly what we're saying. And of course, some who support the administration move that not to renegotiate. And we'll come into that renegotiation in a second. But gentlemen, so we have the 14.5% that we're getting now, or 14.5 barrel per 100, compared to the proposed 55 barrels. What are the pros and cons of the current Stabroek PSA versus the proposed growth split that you gentlemen so eloquently proposing?
I could make a couple of comments on that.
Yes.
The current PSA says we are going to get 2% royalty, which is among the lowest in the world. Most oil countries, or countries producing oil, got something far higher. Our neighbor in Suriname getting something bigger. Then the next concern we should raise is profits. Profits, you're saying, before you calculate profits, you have to take out 75% of your revenue. And we can't verify those cost items. So that immediately puts you at a disadvantage. And there are others. Of course, you mentioned the ring fencing as an issue. And then we have the other concern where Guyana is supposed to give tax receipts to Exxon and EPGL at the end of the year, when in fact, they're not paying anything on taxes. That too is a serious difficulty to live with. In our model, we don't have to worry with collecting royalties. We don't have to worry with profit calculations. All we need is to count the barrels, and that will be a transparent process. Everybody could count, everybody could measure, and there is no difficulty in figuring out how the shares will go. And let me just make a general point. I saw something published not so long ago in Kaicho News of Kathy Michels. She is the Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of ExxonMobil. And this is what she said based on the KN report reported on May 14, 2023. She says that ExxonMobil, the oil company, will spare no efforts in maximizing value from Guyana on all fronts as quickly as possible. Let me say that again. The oil giant will spare no efforts in maximizing value from Guyana on all fronts as quickly as possible. That is very clear what is being said about where they're going with this process. Because as you remember, they have to answer to their shareholders. And their shareholders say, we want maximum returns from their investments, which the management of Exxon will provide. They will look at ways to extract the oil as quickly as possible. And they would want to have what we call an exit strategy to get them out there very quickly without any difficulties in leaving when the oil is finished. So they have a clear program. Guyana must have a clear program as well. Those are my comments.
Dr. Bradley, you want to add anything to that, pros and cons with the new existing contract with the new proposed one?
Yeah, sure. I can add some additional points. I think Kendrick addressed most of the points already. I would maybe say, I mean, there are also some advantages with the Stabroek production sharing agreement, which one maybe should still point out. I think, not everything is, black and white. So where do I see advantage in the current Stabroek block production sharing agreement? What we've seen is an unprecedented rapid development of oil fields off the shore, offshore in Guyana. I think this, if one just looks at the history, it has never been this fast, which has, of course, advantages because it means that Guyana is getting some oil revenues fast. Just compare this to Suriname. Suriname has made their offshore discoveries 2-3 years after Guyana, and they still don't have any any oil production, offshore oil production happening. They've got, of course, decades of onshore oil production, which is relatively small, but no offshore production. So the current Stabroek Block PSA had definitely catalyzed the rapid expansion and development of the oil fields. But this does not mean that we should not think about doing things differently, because now we have experience with oil production offshore. We have experience what it means to audit, which we didn't have. I mean, nobody of us, the only oil experts that Guyana had at the time are people in the diaspora working in Trinidad and in the Houston, Texas area that are, that basically migrated there. But those people were not the people advising the government back in 2015, 2016, when we had these negotiations about the oil contracts. And the Stabroek Block PSA was not a complete reinvention. It was based on a model agreement that was already under, I think, the Janet Jagan's administration. It was finalized in 1999. So this is not, it was based on something that existed already. And we didn't have at the time a thorough analysis about the alternatives. One also has to keep in mind, of course, the whole geostrategic situation at the time, with Venezuela claiming and still claiming 2/3 of the countries of Guyana's territory, particularly the offshore territory. We had seen in the past also Venezuela incursing into Guyanese territory, blocking oil exploration efforts by some companies. So all this was, of course, part of what made, I guess, both administrations favor this situation. But seeing now the problems and difficulties, and I think also what Kendrick mentioned, the fact that we cannot tax Exxon and its partners will have massive impact down the road. I'm not even sure if we really make anything from what we get right now because we're not taxing. And it also will have an impact. If Exxon is taxed and its partners, it means that they have to take US dollars, bring it to the Bank of Guyana, turn it into Guyanese dollars to pay their taxes, which means the Bank of Guyana gets a foreign currency revenue stream, which it does not get. You can look at the foreign currency numbers of Guyana. They stayed flat. And I think one of the pro-government economists had a paper in Guyana Times 2-3 days ago. You can see the numbers there. So I can't see how this is sustainable, the Stabroek Block agreement. So it's been a great agreement for Exxon and its partners. If you also look at cost recovery, Charles mentioned it already, that last it was 7.5 billion. Now that Exxon could do, the projections for this year is 8.5. Now the average cost for a FPSO, sort of these oil extraction and production boats offshore, is about 10 billion. So if you see these numbers, it means that Exxon can recover the money that they forked out to build these boats within, let's say, 1.5 years. So this is also unprecedented, how fast they can basically get their money back again. And the question is this necessary that they get their investments back within 1.5 years, or can we stretch this much longer and the Guyanese people get more of actually their own resources? Back to you, Charles.
And Dr. Hunt did mention that what the Vice President says, to extract as much as possible out of Guyana in the shortest possible time. Gentlemen, the big elephant in the room is this. The government of Guyana, in opposition, the president says, when he was running for the office of president, that everything is on the table with regard to Exxon contract. In the manifesto, they said they will renegotiate the contract. In government, they have now backpedaled on that. So the question is, for us to get this new model that you're proposing, 55 barrels for every 100 produced, that will have to bring Exxon to the table. How does OGGN envisage getting Exxon to the table to renegotiate the PSA? Dr. Brandley, you want to start?
Yeah, maybe I go first. Now, I think what we have to keep in mind is, and I think that's where the government has to be very firm. It's the resources of Guyana, and we control the land and the resources. Exxon is a partner that assists Guyana in extracting these resources, which means that we are setting the terms. Of course, we signed a contract that we signed a contract for the production of this oil, how the revenue is being shared. But contracts can be changed if it's beneficial to both partners. So first of all, I think we should approach Exxon, point out that certain aspects of this contract are not sustainable, like the absence of any taxation for the duration of the contract. It also violates OECD rules that call for corporate international companies that they should pay at least 15% minimal corporate taxes. It turns out that all CARICOM members have signed that OECD agreement except for Guyana and Suriname. And this is something that I, on behalf of OGGN, have pointed out in a letter that was published in Kaiju News and Tablet News a couple of months ago. I have heard no feedback from the government on this, why Guyana is not signing these OECD recommendations. As I would like to recapitulate again, all CARICOM member states except Suriname and Guyana have signed this. Why aren't we doing this? This is like a starting point, because if we did this, we can also get back to Exxon and tell them, look, with a grace period, we should move over to a new model. The other thing is, how do you get Exxon to the table? Exxon, of course, says, and the agreement says they only get the renegotiations only happen if both parties agree. Now, there are measures how to do that. I mean, Guyana has been approving the environmental permits in record time for each new oil project. Does this have to be this way? We can maybe just take time to do this. And there are other issues. Each for expat that is working in Guyana needs a work permit. Instead of getting these work permits within 1 month, it could take a half a year. And you can, of course, make life a little bit more difficult, which brings, Exxon and its partners to the table. I mean, these are just some off-the-top ideas, but I think the important thing is that one goes proud to the table. It's our resources that we're going to talk about it. And Exxon is not a superpower, and we don't talk to the local people. We get the head of Exxon to come to Guyana to talk to us. You don't go to Houston. You have these people come to your country, and that's how you negotiate with these corporations. Because if you go to Houston, it's on their territory. It has to be on our territory in Georgetown. And I think that's the way you have to do this. And of course, it will take time. There's the example of Panama that had renegotiated its mining deals with a bunch of companies. I don't have all the details, but it took 2 to 3 years, and the mining companies were balking against it. But they did an agreement about 6 months, 9 months ago. So it can be done, but you have to be determined, and you have to have a plan, and you have to know what you want. And I can't see none of these things right now on the table. And if they are around, then the vice president who is in charge of this entire sector has not been sharing it with us. Back to you, Charles.
Dr. Hunt, Trinidad recently also changed their contract with oil company. Mm-hmm. How is likely Exxon come to the table?
Well, I joined with Andre's description and yours as well. The Stabroek Block has been de-risked. That means we know there is oil out there. And having a situation where the contract that you've signed before didn't have all this information about what is available, is now opening new pastures and new grounds for us to look at what we can have a more equitable contract. We cannot keep going in this direction. The point is, what we are getting isn't equitable. And to slow down the process is one way of dealing with bringing Exxon to the table. They have a responsibility to their shareholders to have a certain rate of return on their investments. And let me, as we talk about that, you'd note that their return on investment based on profits is a small amount. But in the real terms, what they're getting or suggesting to us is far lower than what the markets in the oil sector earns. So we know that the accounting that we're working with doesn't make a lot of sense. So for us, we got to find a way to slow down the process and bring these people to the table and treat us as a country. What we have here is a company telling a sovereign nation that they can't run their own business. We will control and do everything to our advantage. That is not how the world works. Companies do not control sovereign nations. And Guyana is a sovereign nation, and we have to stand up for people at every occasion. That's my contribution right now.
But Dr. Brandley, the government is saying, listen, based on the scientists around the world, they're saying, hey, oil will be, in a few years, there'll be no more use for oil. So we need to drill now and we need to get it now. What do you say of that? Is that one condition that prevents the government from saying, hey, Exxon, come, you got to come back to the table because we need to get our fair share? Because they're saying, let's drill now, let's get all the revenue now. And as Dr. Hunt said, Exxon VP said, let us get everything that we can get now because we don't know what will happen in the near future. What else?
I mean, there's, of course, there's definitely some grounds for that. And as I mentioned, I think the rapid development of, going to have, by the end of the year, we're going to have Payara going online, has been, beneficial to the country in terms of getting an additional source of revenue. And, it's not a small resource. It's 90% of Guyana's exports in value is oil. It's 90%, and that within 3 years. So we have to keep this in mind. Unfortunately, we are not taxing it again. I have to come back again to that. So that is leaving the country, which leaves us with a huge GDP per capita, and actually has already negative consequences for Guyana, because if you look at the value of that oil leaving the country divided by the people, suddenly Guyana is a high income country, which also means that for developmental projects, we are not getting loans at favorable rates for a poor country that most people conceive the country is. And the general population has not seen much of a change because it's not really been trickling down to them that much. So we are running in a situation where we are perceived as rich, but the general Guyanese person on the street doesn't see it. And it has all types of consequences. So I think we really have to do a change. And I think the other thing that we have to really be, totally clear, Exxon is not a charity. It's a company to make profit. And it's our job to regulate the profit that we think is fair that they can make in our country. And this is nothing to do about being mean to them. They know how the business is. And one thing that all companies do not want to have, they don't want to have unpredictable situations. So if Guyana raises the issue of that they want to renegotiate the current production sharing agreement for the Star Group block, sooner or later, the CEO of Exxon sitting in Houston will say, look, I rather have a controlled situation where we renegotiate things and we're going to bring it into a situation that looks better than we have constant uncertainty and maybe a shutdown or a block of further expansion. With regard to, and I didn't address actually your point in terms of oil and how long we're going to need oil. I think burning oil is a bad idea and we should get away from burning oil. But oil is, of course, also a very important resource in the petrochemical industry. It's a starting product for all different types of chemicals that we use. Plastics are developed out of oil. So there's going to be always a use of oil. It might be a little bit less, but for foreseeable future, we'll need oil and its products. Not necessary to burn it, which is probably the worst thing we can do with it because it's too precious, in my opinion, but for other purposes. And the other thing which I think allows Guyana to be in a position that it can afford arresting the oil field development for a while is because if you have 3 or 4 FPSOs producing, and if you look at our sovereign wealth fund, the amount of money that flows in there that can be withdrawn is capped. So if you look at the numbers, you can maybe withdraw $1.4 billion max with the withdrawal rules that the current administration has put into place. So that's the max that you can put into your the consolidated fund for annual use in the country. And that is reached. So if you have 10, you can't withdraw more. The rest would just go into your savings. So what we are just doing is by putting Exxon under pressure and maybe having an arrest of or a slowing down of oil field development is that the money that goes into our savings will be delayed. So this will be the consequence. It doesn't mean that we will get no money. And Exxon doesn't want that because they want those revenues coming in. So by asking for renegotiation, we are not stopping everything. We are just arresting further development until the Stabroek Block agreement has been revised, that it's more in favor of Guyana. And as I said, taxation is important. Every Guyanese is expected to pay value-added taxes, to pay income tax if they qualify. How come the largest contributor to our economy is tax exempt for the duration of the contract? In my simple view, no government can survive an election down the road if they are advocating that the largest contributor to our economy doesn't pay taxes. Very simple.
And Dr. Brandley, before you come on, Dr. Brandley, you're so right in that oil is not only for driving cars or boats and trucks. There's so many products that comes from oil, the byproducts, and the population of the world is increasing. So the demand for other products is there. So they need to rush to drill now because they think global warming, oil will stop producing. That's not true. But Dr. Hunt, we have limited time now. Time has run out of us. What are the chances of Exxon and its partners agreeing to changing the current PSA?
Before I attempt to provide an answer, I just want to go back to one point which I think is relevant. The idea that Guyana's GDP per capita is now among the highest in the world, it's costing Guyana because we've been pushed into an area to borrow money at higher interest rates. We cannot get lower cost money to be borrowed. Now, that is a false set of calculations because your GDP per capita takes only into account what you produce. What we're supposed to be counting is Guyana gross national income. I want to make this point. Gross national income will be a more accurate measure because you're not considering yourself with the 85.5% maximum that is extracted when Exxon takes its money out of the economy.
Dr. Hunt, we have lost your picture.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so basically what we're looking at here is we want to have a situation in which the idea that GNI should be the measure, not GDP per capita. That's what we have to change because that's a negative for us. It pushes Guyana into no concessional lending any longer. So this is a negative coming to Guyana as a result of using our own natural resources by somebody else who's not paying taxes to us.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I like that.
So when you consider how to help or what should we do to bring them to the table, that's a point that should be made every time, because Exxon is costing Guyana to borrow money going forward. Now, we mentioned earlier some of the things we can do. We could slow down this process because the risk, they have the risk, the Stabroek Block. Everybody know there is oil there now, and they know how to get it. So we have the advantage in dealing with some of these matters. And I'd like to see a different approach taken to get these matters resolved. Thank you, Charles.
Dr. Bradley, what are the chances of Exxon coming to the table?
Of course, they won't. They're going to be dragging their feet, and they're going to be screaming and shouting. That's just a fact, and we've heard that already. There's Alistair Rutledge would definitely not say in public that they're going to be willingly coming to the table, because of course the model works for them greatly. And we should not only just get this, personified towards the local head of the Exxon operations in Guyana, Alistair Rutledge. There's also John Hess, who tells his shareholders on a regular basis what a great place for profits Guyana is. So it's clear that they don't want to change the model. So they're going to be, dragging their feet. They're going to be fighting against it at all different levels. But this should not deter us from really going ahead. Unfortunately, I think, if we had a common strategy between both major parties in Guyana, we could, coordinate this better. But as we all know, the consensus building is very difficult, particularly in this area. From my personal view, I thought that the whole discussion about the petroleum activities bill that is now act had opportunities there to pave the way for new discussions and for renegotiations. The opposition have put in their amendments to the draft bill of the government. One of them was actually very interesting. They were asking that by the end of the decade, all existing production sharing agreements should be rolled over into models that have been approved in the petroleum activities bill. So that would have been, setting things in place, together with my suggestion, for example, that Guyana should sign the OECD agreement of a minimal tax of 15%. So these are, if you have a strategy, you set these types of pillars in there that make it very clear to Exxon and its partners that things are going to be changing. And just imagine the US government, would they agree to a contract which would punish and ask for damage payments if Guyana introduces taxes? That's what's written in the Stabroek Block Agreement, that Guyana is not allowed to tax Exxon for the duration of the contract. And if they do so, they are liable for any losses and damages. This is outrageous, in my opinion, because it undermines in the US, it's the Congress who sets taxes, and nobody has the right to tell a sovereign nation that they can't raise taxes. And if you cannot raise taxes, you are no longer a sovereign nation, because you can't control your revenue stream and adjust it to the needs of the country. And that's what this agreement is actually doing. It limits Guyana's ability to adjust its revenue stream for the benefit of its people. And I think this has to be changed. And it has to be fair, of course, because you don't want to have a situation where other investors might think you can't trust Guyana. But so it can be done. It's tough. And of course, it's more convenient just to sit there if, some people might profit from the way the situation is.
Gentlemen, we're out of time now. It has been a great discussion. We will be back, audience. We'll be back the Thursday after next. Every second Thursday, we'll be on the air with this program, All Talk with OGGN Guyana. In our inaugural program tonight, we are very honored to have two professionals in their own field, Dr. Andre Brandley. He's a professor there in Switzerland. And of course, Dr. Hunt, who's also a professor and also former ambassador to Guyana. Gentlemen, anything in closing?
I think the program that OGGN will put on will certainly bring information to the Guyanese public so they could understand the workings of this industry. And I'm hoping that with the full understanding of the Guyanese people, we can get movement in the right direction. I look forward to a better return on Guyana natural resources. And as you remember, natural resources, non-renewable natural resources are exhaustible, and future generations should not blame us for not doing our job well. And we have a responsibility to that future generation. And this is a time for us to step up and get the job done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hunt. Dr. Brandley.
I think I don't have much more to add to it. I just want to make it clear to the Guyanese public that with Oil Talk, with OGGN Guyana, that you get the unbiased information about what OGGN stands, that we are on the side of the people, that we want to have oil contracts and the whole oil industry run in a professional, in a transparent, and in a manner that involves also all stakeholders in the country. So we would like to see, for example, that new model contracts are broadly discussed. We do not want to see a situation where the government sits over this for months, gives the public 2 weeks time to respond, and then there's not really a process where you can see what was taken up from the public's response. How did the model contract, was it adjusted? I have no idea what was at all submitted within those 2 weeks that the public had a chance to look at 200-page plus documents. And I think we need much more a dialogue where we, all stakeholders in Guyana, really look at what we want to have, where are we going, what are we going to do with our oil resources. And I think a forum like this, Oil Talk with OGGN Guyana, is a forum where we can articulate these concerns and also provide suggestions and new ideas to the Guyanese public. At the end, it's the Guyanese people that should have the say with its elected members of parliament that these decisions are taken and broadly discussed. And it's possible. I have seen it with the radioactivity law that went through parliament. It went to a select committee, and it was broad consensus. Both parties voted for the radioactivity regulation laws. A very technical issue, but it can be done. So it's not that the two parties cannot work together. They can work on technical issues. It just means that we have to expand it to all issues that enter parliament. That's basically my point, and we are here to make this clear to the public.
Thank you, gentlemen. And it's very interesting to know that today being our first day in the year, it's a super moon and it's also a blue moon. Very auspicious day, and we want to wish all Guyanese all the best. I hope they were able to see the super moon tonight. I'm going to go out now and see if I can see it here in New York. But all the best, all our viewers, to you, gentlemen, and to Kaieteur Radio. Until the next time, God bless our great country of Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, and
Bye-bye.
Good night to everyone.